Welcome everybody to yet another episode of Mastering Therapy. For those of you that joined last season, you will probably have heard the episode I did on IFS and an introduction to IFS and how we might use it in sessions. Well, this is kind of a part two, but this week my guest is David Polidi. He is an EMDR therapist, IFS guru, and David, a couple of months ago, just released a book about blending these two approaches. And I know there is lots of questions that people have because there's not much out there about how to really blend the two. So thank you for coming today and for sharing your wisdom. I am a little bit intimidated. My parts are a bit intimidated, but also delighted to have you. So thank you for coming on.
I just want to, I'm flattered. I don't find myself to be a guru of IFS. This is how I'm referred to by a lot of my clients. Just I'm a social worker and somebody who wants to be a healer, wants to be a helper. And even the book, my book, I don't even really call it my book. It's IFS-informed EMDR, creative collaborative approaches. It highlights 22 of us that are trainers, and teachers, consultants, and therapists. And it's really, I think the beauty of the project is that it's not any one person saying, this is what informed EMDR is. It's more like a reflection of this is how 22 souls have interpreted and used and found meaning in the models and in the combination of the models.
Yeah, and so I think you've done really well to capture that. And also the people that you have been influenced by and sharing a bit of your journey. So, we may be able to touch on that today. There are some people that will be listening to this that are primarily EMDR, that have maybe recently done some IFS training and are at the beginning stages of thinking, how do I weave this in? And there'll be other people that maybe are more kind of heavily IFS dominant with a bit of the EMDR thrown in occasionally. I wondered for you whether you're always blending, like just is that your default, or have you kind of created this new model that isn't one or the other, it is just this new kind of IFS EMDR model?
Yeah, no, I love that question. And I would say I'm definitely, like all of us, I'm continually growing, continuing developing. As of right now, my journey has really been a lot with learning the Syzygy model, which is Bruce Hersey and a lot of the people in the book. Not all, but all of the Syzygy trainers are featured in the book. And the Syzygy model, I would say, again, it's Bruce Hersey. I would say that, that model really sees us working with clients with always using IFS-informed EMDR. We're always using IFS. We're always using EMDR. With EMDR, I find that from day one, we're implementing the strategies. We're not necessarily going right for reprocessing trauma memories, but if we have a sense of the 8 phases, we always know what phase am I in, what phase am I in, and what phase am I heading to. So that's a map that we're always holding when we're with a client. And at the same time, I would say with IFS, we're always holding the sense that there's a multiplicity within all of us. And so whatever we're doing with the EMDR at that moment, we're always asking ourselves, what parts are in the room? What parts are here with us? What parts are we working with? What parts are we doing EMDR with? And what IFS, I think IFS levels up just ego state because it really keeps us aware of, in addition to what parts are in the room, we're always asking ourselves how much self-energy is in the room. And I don't know if Zandra spoke about self-energy. I would imagine they did. Yeah. But a big focus of IFS is how much self-energy does my client have and how much self-energy do I have? And trying to find a way to connect to more and more self-energy. Because that self-energy is really kind of the animation of the IP system. So we're always seeing like how much access do we have to that?
Yeah. One of the things we'll come on to a bit later is, when you're doing reprocessing and it feels like protectors are kind of preventing or getting in the way of that or protecting, and that can actually be really difficult for therapists, because I think that interrupts that self-energy, and it's really important to then think about, what systems are going on for us as therapists. So maybe we could talk about that I'm sure that will come up. Just thinking about those phases. So just as a disclaimer for those listening, I'm EMDR trained. I'm not IFS trained. I've always felt like EMDR, because it is so structured, even the words that you say, the order that you say it, it feels very, very important to adhere to the model in that way. IFS seems a lot more gentle, and thinking about phase 2 in particular of EMDR, so the resourcing, the stabilization that we might do with clients. In your book, you talk about phase 2.5, and I think this is part of Bruce's model. And I think this will be an important context for maybe thinking then about working with parts and protectors during reprocessing. But do you mind just explaining to our listeners about that phase 2.5 and how it differs from maybe what you might normally do as part of the standard EMDR protocol?
Yeah, well, I'm happy. That's a great question. I think that IFS will kind of add a lot of value, or does add a lot of value to EMDR in that, and Annabelle McGoldrick speaks a lot about this, as do others, that if you're going into a house and you really want to help a child who's struggling, you meet the parents at the front door. You're not just going to barge right in and be like, let me go to the kid, let me fix the child. You're going to wait to be invited in by the parents. Okay, let me go. And so I think with phase 2 in general, we're getting a lay of the land of what parts are present, what parts are here, and do we have permission to meet with some of the trauma, some of the ones that are holding what IFS would call burdens, what EMDR would call trauma memories. But do we have permission for that? That's huge, asking for that permission. And I think that we always want to honor this work. And so what happens at times is, with the IFS model, people become blended with their parts. They have the parts kind of controlling them, taking over, and they're not even aware of that. So we're trying to get a sense of, is that going on? And some of our protectors, I've heard that protectors are as big and hold the same amount of energy as the hurt that the exiles hold. So if we are very traumatized, if we're holding a lot of hurt, then the protectors are going to have a lot of energy. They're going to say, I don't want to unblend. I can't. That's going to be unsafe. So we want to honor. And what phase 2.5 is, which another name for it is the discovery phase. It's really trying to focus on a protector that's blended with the client. And when we don't feel any self energy or any access to the AIP, system, this is a way to use bilateral stimulation and to say, we just want to get to know this protector a little bit better. And would it be okay for us to do a little bit of bilateral? What this model, the Syzygy model, does also, which is really cool, is it uses some of Knife's work and Popsky's work, which is a level of urge to use and level of urge to avoid something. And what it says is it uses it with the protector by focusing on the level of urge to protect. So protector wants to protect us. We want to find, and this is going back to Dick Schwartz's book, No Bad Parts. All of our parts have a purpose, have a reason, and have a positive intention. For that positive intention, if we're able to identify that positive intention, we could actually ask, okay, you have this positive intention, whatever it is, how strong is that from 1 to 10? Let's give it a number. That becomes our suds. And then we say, let's just try to explore that. And we do the bilateral and we see, where that's going to take the person. And ultimately, I believe what Bruce has found is that we're connecting with the self energy within that protector part. And if we allow that self energy of that protector part with the bilateral to grow and grow and grow, eventually we're going to quote unquote flip the part. And when we flip the part, now all of a sudden we're revealing, oh, this is the exile that part is protecting, that we could eventually move towards. But it's not about having an agenda of healing. It's really about having an agenda of building a relationship, which having the patience to sit with them, build a relationship, gain trust, so that at some point they're just going to say, ooh, could you help me? And at that point, okay, let's figure out how we could help you. And then we're moving into more of a phase 3, phase 4 of EMDR. But what my book talks about is how so much of the work with complex trauma and with a lot of the people that I meet with, and that I think, unless you have a single traumatic episode that you're going to therapy specifically to heal, in which case EMDR works very smoothly. We're talking about complex trauma. We're really sitting in phase 2 quite a bit. It's 2.5 if you like. We're expanding that world because there's a lot of healing that takes place within phase 2. And I found that when we get to phase 3, phase 4, and all the rest, the work actually goes fairly quickly. But getting the client...
You've prepped so much, you've done so much work that it's as much about that almost as it is the reprocessing.
Or even more so. I think that EMDR, with all of its wonderful addition to the field, and I would never, say that EMDR isn't a really important model. For me, it's been amazing. I feel that it doesn't really give specific steps and specific ways. It has a couple of suggestions, but I think IFS has a lot more specificity and language that could help clients process and move through the phase 2 of the EMDR.
I think this will be really encouraging if people maybe are EMDR trained and have found themselves getting stuck, because it's very typical for us to think, oh, this is me doing this wrong, and if they were with another therapist, this would be really easy. But I think you're right to make that distinction with the complexity, because I have found that sometimes even mentioning this concept, the protector part is just there, and you could get somebody just shutting down immediately because they just can't even tolerate the idea of revisiting something. And so I loved that metaphor that you used about meeting the parents at the house, and you have to be invited in. And sometimes I think our medical models and time limited interventions just force a bit of a knocking down the door, and that doesn't ever feel good.
This is where I agree with you completely. And this is where I could bring in motivational interviewing, and we could go as much or as deep or not at all as you want.
No, share. I think it'll be interesting for people to hear.
Well, yeah, cool. I have a lot of thoughts about the medical model and, USA, where I'm at, how much pressure there is on therapists to do it quickly. And I think MI would say that if we want to go, and IFS says this too all the time, if you want to go fast, you got to slow it down. And, MI sees it as physics, perhaps, where if you're pushing too far, too hard one way, the natural response of the other person is going to be pushed back. And so we have this medical model. It's like, let's do it as quickly as we can. Let's run in. Let's do what we can. And you're just building up defenses by doing that, as opposed to having no pressure whatsoever and just instead having this really beautiful relationship of trust. And then when that's built, say, where do you want to go? And trusting that the person that you're sitting with knows the quickest, most efficient way to get what they're needing. It's already inside of them, and helping them trust that.
But I would love us to have a bit of a discussion on how you might weave IFS into that. If when you are processing, you come up against a protector and how you stay in, noticing your own self-energy and not getting flustered or discouraged by that, or how you know that that's happening and then how you attend to that. So loads of different directions we can go in, but I guess a discussion on what we do when those protectors get in the way and how you attend to them in that moment.
I'm like, oh, let's have a demonstration, because I know that's something we want to do, and it might come up just in that, because I'd have to think of a specific example, or if you had a specific example, definitely welcome that.
Yeah, so for example, I was processing, this was a client that I worked with a few years ago. We were processing a particularly difficult childhood memory that had taken loads and loads of resourcing to get to that point. And they were really terrified of going there, but were up for it and felt like it was important and really wanted to process that. However, it didn't take long, no matter how much grounding work that we'd done, that they would just kind of dissociate in the session. And then it was really hard work as a therapist, because then the rest of the session was really trying to ground them, stabilize them, and, reassure, and not finish the session like that. That happened quite a few times. And I wonder in that, at that point, I didn't have any IFS language for that. But when I look back, I think, gosh, that was a protector just doing a fantastic job. They were doing what they had done for their whole life, and they were doing it really well. And I wish past me could have spoken to it, but this is the beauty of growing, isn't it? Are there certain ways that you go about pausing and sitting with that protector, speaking to it, working with it? How do you do that?
So I'd back up, because you've said a lot of beautiful things. I would back up, and as the therapist, just notice what parts are coming up inside of me, and see, am I feeling that feeling of self-energy being present? Or are there parts, like an anxious part, or a pushing part, or a worried part? I need to stay to the protocol, and just gently ask them. Joanne Twombly has a chapter on the fire drill, which is an IFS technique.
Yes, I was hoping you would bring this up. Do you mind just saying what that is? Because I think that's a really helpful tool that therapists can use, or even in supervision as well, to work with their own parts.
Of course. And I'll say, I find the biggest value of the IFS Institute level 1 training, and probably level 2, level 3 as well, is really having you sit there with other people, using the model, practicing, and really recognizing the parts that are coming up inside of you. I laughed to my wife that, I'd go through a training and it's like, great. It's like I just had intensive therapy for 2 days straight, and you get exhausted. But so I think that there's a lot of value to understanding what's inside of you so that you could be in the right frame of mind. And the fire drill is basically just trying to, I'm going to say something embarrassing here. I don't know why it's called the fire drill, but I read Joanne's chapter and it's amazing. And basically what it is saying, what parts do you recognize inside of you? And as a therapist, if you are doing IFS work, you're probably familiar with some of your parts, and you're just gently asking them, could you step aside so that I could be in self-energy in this therapy session? Could you step aside? I see you, I'm naming you, I'm taking a moment, just acknowledge you. And I'll come back to you after therapy when I have my own time, when I'm meditating, when I'm relaxing. But for right now, could I just see you, recognize you're in the room? But really, this is a big thing that we say in IFS. You want to speak for a part, not from a part. So if there is a part coming up, saying, if you need to say something, tell me and I'll translate it, or it'll come through my heart. But I don't want to be blended, because that's a great way to have the therapy get off track and not completely focused. And I guess, kind of thinking about it, I think of like an elementary school. And when you have a fire drill, you have all the kids line up and they go class by class, and then you separate all the class and make sure all the kids are there so that you're not missing anybody, nobody's stuck in the building. It would be similar with a fire drill. You're taking all your parts gently asking them to leave the building, and then just lining them up so you know everybody's there. You're seeing it, you're counting for everybody, and then you're not allowing them to take over in that session. So
Great.
kind of moving forward, that's the fire drill as I understand it.
Yeah,
Moving
thank you. I think that
forward.
would be helpful.
Yeah, sure, of course. So moving forward with your example, I would first ask, after doing a fire drill, I would just ask, like, what parts are present, and could you make sure that we have all the parts permission before going towards our work with the MDR? Because clients a lot of times will want to do the work, and that could be one part that just like, I gotta get healed, I gotta get this. But we really want to make sure, do all your parts agree? Does every part of you give us that permission? Because if any one part doesn't, we want to pause and we want to understand more. What is it afraid of? What is the wisdom that it has for us before we continue to do the healing work? And so, what I'm hearing from you is there was this part that used dissociation as a tool, as a protecting tool, and that part was not fully on board. And so that part would come up. And so we would want to notice that pattern and talk to that dissociating part and get to know that dissociating part. And that's really hard, right? When you hear a client say, look, if you say, what's coming up inside or what part is here? And they're like, nothing. There's nothing right now. That could mean a lot of things. And one of the things it could mean is maybe that nothing is a part, right? Or the dissociation is a part. So, that could lead into a whole nother discussion. But part of that is, or an element of that is, how do we get to know this dissociation part? How do we help the client relate to it, to listen to it? And how do we help have a relationship between the client's self-energy and that dissociating part? And at that point, maybe the dissociation part could feel a little bit more comfortable to relax and allow the process to take place.
And would you be doing that? I mean, it's hard to know how long these things take, right? Because a protector that is really not on board may not just suddenly be like, oh, do you know what? Thanks for hearing me. It's fine. Continue. I think that would be great. But I think it then comes back to us being able to not be flustered by that, because often I think maybe it's just me, but put pressure on myself.
Trust me,
that
it's not just you. It's not just
this
you.
must go well. Oh gosh, if we don't do this, then the client's going to feel like, oh, we didn't actually process this session because my part's got in the way and I'm a failure. And then you're managing another part. So it's complex, isn't it? But the thing I love about IFS is that there is, like you say, you go, like, it is slower. And even if you really want to rush, parts are not going to let you, just because that's your agenda. And that's when you come up against dissociation or, whatever it looks like for somebody. Even them pushing to just keep going could, be that threat part of them that's activated that is just not allowing them to really feel it. There's
a danger for that, because then I think what IFS says is there could be backlash. If you piss off one of these parts and you just bulldoze right over them, maybe you get somewhere, but then throughout the week, it's like something really bad happens. The anxiety spikes. They get really upset. Dick talks about how he had somebody and he was negotiating with a part that was like, wanted to cut, and they were going to cut the girl, I believe it was her wrists. And he's like, you can't do that. And he bulldozed the part without meaning to. And the next week she showed up with the gash on her face. And the part's like, see, I told you I wouldn't cut on her wrists. That's what we agreed. Yeah. So I think there could be this huge backlash if we're not respecting these parts.
Have you ever found it, David, where you've not had success with negotiating with a part, and therefore have you then pivoted if you're, say, in the middle of processing and protector shows up and you sit alongside it, you get them to name it, you try and talk to it, but it is just not having it? How do you deal with that?
My jokey answer is I go to consultation and I say, help me, help me. But I think that in that moment, yeah, of course I've had that. And I've learned that, and hopefully I do this more and more, that it's not about negotiating with the parts. It's not about trying to change them. It's not about really wanting anything. It's just sitting with them in that self energy saying, I'm here for you right now. I'm here for you. My heart is open for you. And trying to help the client do that with their self energy. And just that connection alone is major. So we're really trying to help a client invite in more and more of their own self energy into the space. And if we are stuck in negotiating with a part, we're in the wrong place.
And also, if you start getting frustrated, annoyed, sad, I think these are all signs, aren't they, of us bringing our own systems into the mix and needing to step outside of that, because if we're in that space, then we're not going to be able to serve our clients in the way that they need.
Completely.
Can I ask you a bit of a controversial one, David?
Yes,
because
please.
Of where my mind is going with that is how, and I talked a little bit with Sandra about this idea that the client has everything already inside of them. They have that, and it is about connecting with that self that's always been there. I guess it's similar a little bit in the idea that with EMDR, you're facilitating what the brain is designed to do, and you're just kind of overseeing that. You're not causing it or adding it. It's kind of already there. You're just helping that process. Because of, I guess, how IFS positions itself, is there a need for EMDR at all? Why not just use IFS? Why use the bilateral stimulation at all if we could, or is there have you found there be greater benefit when you have blended the two within particular situations or with particular clients? Or sometimes do you think we'll just literally use IFS here?
Your part is coming up, which has sarcasm, which is saying to myself, Natalie, is that controversial? And where is the controversy in that? I'm laughing because you're bringing up a very important thing, and you're bringing up something that I wonder if there is some disagreement in the field about that. And I think there might be a bunch of IFS, quote unquote, purists that feel that that's a very legitimate question, that they would say you only need IFS and it is a complete model and you don't need anything else. I think personally, not wanting to step on any toes, but also wanting to be honest and transparent and truthful, it's just not how I think. I really feel that models are not the end all and the be all. And I think that I could say, I love IFS. It's been life-changing to me. I love EMDR. It's been life-changing to me. But they're models. And I guarantee you 10 years from now, there's going to be tons of changes in them if they're going to still be relevant, because we're constantly growing. We're constantly learning. And I would never want a model to stifle me in being able to relate to my client and what they're telling me right there, right then in the moment. And that's where I go back to my training as a social worker. If I'm with a client, I'm in a relationship right there, which is the most important thing when we're healing somebody or helping them heal. And in that relationship, if my model tells me to go one way, but I'm feeling that the right way clinically is to go another way, I'm trust my gut. I'm going to trust what, and I think in IFS language, that's really sitting in self-energy. In self-energy, it's sitting in this knowledge of there's some knowing that we both share. And in this moment, we're going to trust that. And whatever is in the model, whatever is, it's a great guide. But I was talking to Kendall Hart last week, and we were talking about how, her as a trainer, as a consultant, I'm like, if I'm sitting with somebody and we're doing EMDR, but clinically, the book tells me the protocol says go here, go right. But I'm feeling like the best thing to do is go left. I'm going to go left. And she said, well, as long as you could explain why you're doing that, as long as you could put words to, this is my rationale, and this is my thought of how to get back on track to the model. For her, she said, we're good. We're good. And so I feel that way too. I feel that, they're maps. They're maps, and we don't want to be stifled by maps. We want to take a map and you get to know a landscape. But if I'm looking at a map of some place that has, thinking of when I went to Africa and there's soil degradation, and I'm like, the map isn't matching up to what I'm seeing. Do I change the map? Or do I say like, oh no, let's pour some more soil on this because it has to match the map that I made? And when it comes to IFS, I think Francine Shapiro has found something that has been magical to people, and we have, all these different books, and trainers and ways of understanding some of the magic of EMDR and some of the ways that this really helps people hit some really deep things inside of them. Why are we going to throw that out? Because we have another model that also works. Wouldn't it be better to just say, what could we take from the EMDR world and connect it with the IFS world? And if somebody for whatever reason isn't connecting with the language, isn't connecting with the imagery, I'm still going to have an IFS lens. I'm not going to stop seeing them as multiple because that's just how my mind now is conditioned to see reality. But I'm not going to throw parts language in their face. I'll use some EMDR language, and I won't talk about it as like, now I'm talking to your exile part. What could you do some insight work and talk to your exile part? I'll say, oh, let's do some EMDR if you want to. And let's see like what memories are we talking about and how could we work with these memories?
There are so many thoughts that I have on this, David, and one of them is a discussion on the evidence base. And I, again, love that metaphor of going right or left. If you see to go left, you're going to go left, not just go right because someone's told you to. And I do think this is, again, it comes back to the medical model and what we define as what the evidence base is. But there's something about IFS that I think invites a necessity to be flexible. But my experience, I guess, of EMDR is that it's very much not. So I think there is something kind of magical in being able to blend these two approaches that, EMDR has some, I think so many of us have stories of, where you're, maybe in a session you're thinking, oh my goodness, like, is this going to shift? And then it is quite miraculous. And somebody's, then saying, oh, I feel like completely different. My life's changed. And maybe I didn't have the faith that would happen, even in the middle of it. So the protocol works and it's wonderful. But I think I can also think of many times where I've come across situations where now my language would be, I'm coming up against a protector here. And the worst thing to do would be just to keep going and be that bulldozer and not listen to what that protector is saying or what your gut is saying, which is maybe to stop. And maybe in EMDR terms, you might pause, you do some stabilization or resourcing, and that might be the rest of the session. Just a question that's come up for me. At the end of a processing session, you talk about how processing can continue after the session, make a note of anything that comes up, dreams, thoughts. When you're blending the two, are you inviting clients to note down how their parts respond after the session? Do you use that as material when they then come back for their next session and you say, has anything come up? How's the last week been? Are you interested in how the parts are responding to the therapy?
And I think IFS goes even further where I caution my clients, like if we're doing sensitive work, if we're doing trauma healing processing, it's nice to have a witness. It's nice to have somebody else in the room. It's nice to have somebody objective that has the self energy to be there and to sit. However, if you're finding parts, be it protectors, exiles, whoever, and you're relating to them, IFS has this beautiful way of saying, could you make an arrangement to maybe meet with your part, throughout the week? Could you check in? Could you see how that part is doing? Could you just sit with a little bit of love for that part and see if the part wants to say anything? And so it's encouraging the client to even schedule a time or to make some kind of agreement of they will check in with their parts throughout the week to really have that ongoing relationship between themselves and their parts. Ideally, when clients are feeling activated, upset, or going through a hard time, I find it extremely beneficial when clients are able to witness what part is coming up in those moments. Can you take a pause and just sit with the part that's coming up? Even if it's just putting your hand on your heart and saying, I see you right now. I see you. I name you. That could sometimes even just be enough to be able to have that ongoing relationship. So I think IFS is really kind of sharing with people, this is more than just therapy. This is a lifestyle. This is a lifestyle of recognizing there's parts that are like your family inside of yourself, and you want to build this ongoing, trusting relationship with them. Whereas I think EMDR doesn't do that as explicitly, and doesn't, it's more like you go into therapy, you have EMDR, you're healed, you're done. And I like the kind of practice that IFS invites our clients to have.
Hearing the way that you talk about it, David, I think is energizing and helpful for people. And it's always a good reminder of when our stuff might be interrupting the work. For people that are beginning this journey of IFS and EMDR and combining them, where would you say, if they haven't done any formal training, obviously your book is a great resource for people, but I imagine that getting some kind of formal training is necessary to really feel confident in, if you're IFS trained and you're EMDR trained, to be able to bring them both together. Where could people go, or where could they get more information?
Love that. I think that, I found it very helpful to have a consultant. Consultation is great. Maybe the first thing is picking up some books. If tons of books, I think that is exciting. I think also, either it's my book or something else, my book has a lot of people that offer trainings. And so just contacting some of the training places, I think Syzygy is a wonderful place. I think Annabelle McGoldrick has some amazing trainings. There's many trainings. I don't want to miss anybody. So many trainers that I think teach about IFS and EMDR. I think also, there's some really cool trainings on just IFS even. The gold standard would be to go through the Institute, which is expensive and it does take a while to get in. But I think if somebody is really saying, this is something I need in my life, the Institute is amazing. The community of IFS practitioners inside the IFS Institute, and going to the conferences and seeing the people that you align with and whatever topics that you're interested in, getting more information, like has somebody connected these topics with IFS? Probably yes. And if not, maybe you're the one to do that. So just to get to grow, listen to podcasts like yours, like mine. I think that was really helpful to me, to listen to some of the podcasts that are out there, hearing the authors speak, hearing some of the big names in IFS speaking was very helpful.
We'll put these as links into the show notes, your podcast and your book.
Sure. We could even list out the authors so people could see what they're training and contact them directly. There's some amazing trainings that they offer.
A final question that I had. IFS obviously has gained a lot of traction over the last few years, and no matter what modality people find themselves majoring in, I think the concept of parts is really powerful because we can all relate. Now, I spoke in depth with Zandra about how important training is, that it's experiential, because it's not just about learning, okay, what are XRs, what are managers, what's blended, all these IFS terms. You have to live it to be able to do the work. And so I guess this will be interesting for people if they're like me, EMDR trained, but not IFS trained. But as a word of caution, would it be right for people that are inspired by parts work and they're using it in EMDR, they're coming up against maybe dissociation? Would it be okay, do you think, for them to then start interviewing parts and sitting with parts if they haven't really gone through the IFS model and training and experienced it for themselves? Do you think there's harm in that, I guess, is what I'm asking?
No, I might be totally wrong on this. I don't want to speak for anybody else. And, or Syzygy, I would ask my consultant, be like, what? That's such a good question. My own self. So take this answer with a grain of salt. This is just me. But my understanding is no, there's no harm in that. And I'll tell you why. I was doing it before I had any official training. In my EMDR class, they brought in Fraser's dissociated table. And it was in an art and EMDR class that was like an adjunct. They brought in Fraser's dissociated table. And the next day I went in armed with the dissociated table and was having clients talk about their parts and inviting their parts into the table and sitting around the table and just having dialogues with the parts in your knowledge as a therapist, what you feel comfortable with. There's a lot of formal steps that you'll learn in the classes. There's a lot of unburdenings and stuff. But I think the general concept, the importance of it is and to go back to what you and Xandra were talking about, it's a model that is not supposed to be in your head solely. It's really in your heart. It's in the energy. It's in what you're bringing to that space that goes beyond cognition. And I think EMDR does that too. Maybe a little, again, more implicitly, but I think EMDR does do it. I think that what Dick would say is that if we have an appreciation for parts and we're talking about parts, what we really want to do is be mindful of being respectful and honoring their voice and able to move into the space of, I would never want to tell you this is your part or this is the part that you have. I might suggest it. I might say, this is what I think. How do you feel? What do you feel is coming up? What do you feel is inside? Does this feel right to you? Does this resonate with you? People sometimes are going to talk in parts language naturally. A part of me wants to go here. Part of me doesn't. Part of me, and okay, let's notice that. But I think we get into trouble if we try to force things. If we're trying to force parts language on somebody that doesn't want to go there, then don't do it. And I think IFS training would say the same thing. You don't want to force that if it's not connecting with our clients. You don't want to do it if it feels disrespectful or if it feels like we're calling out or shaming in any way or even having like some judgment to what we're doing. But if we're doing it in an honest, open way where our intention is just to really help the client understand their inner systems better and we're doing it respectfully, why not a parts language? I think we already could use that without any IFS against the ego states. Ego states about that all the time. So, Freud talked about it. He just named his parts id, ego, and superego. So we use it. It's just, how do we want to language it? And IFS, the more we dig into it, the more it gives us this very unique and I think cool language for it.
Yeah. David, thank you for that response because that question is very much I introduced it as like my perfectionist part. And I think a lot of us have that when you're maybe a bit more apprehensive or less experienced in a model. There's this real drive to get it right and do it right and follow the protocol, which I think, some models set that up, like EMDR is quite like, this is right. And if you're not doing this, then you've done it wrong. But IFS is not like that. And that's what I think so amazing about it. So anyone listening that you've dipped your toe into the parts work, don't feel like you're doing something wrong, I think is this does come with experience, doesn't it? The more experience you get and the more clients that you see and the trainings that you expose yourself to, you will have a greater confidence, I think, in being able to do that from reading a book or being on the receiving end of therapy. So yeah, thank you. I think that will be a welcomed answer.
I would even say this, and I don't know how this hits you, and I'm not a trainer in EMDR, but I would even say even in EMDR, I hope that there's more and more focus on the relational aspects of it, that it really is about being able to be open to what you're offering the client and how it's hitting them and how they're reacting. And so for me
Yeah.
personally, I really dig into this sense that I think Rotem Breyer brings in, that, it's an art and a science. So yeah, we want to be as faithful as we can to the model because there's a lot of wisdom in it. But we also have to understand that we bring our own interpretations, our own sense of what's right and wrong, our own sense of like how to heal with us into that room. And if we're too focused on doing it exactly the way that it's spelled out, we're missing, I think, the underlying energy of that model. And so I go into it saying to myself, like, I'm going to mess it up. I'm not going to do it perfectly. I'm not going to. And I had my consultant when I was going through getting certified in EMDR, that'd be like, you need to follow the rules. And I'm like, but I'm a rule breaker. I don't want to follow the rules. And I'm not saying don't follow the rules. And I'm not saying don't, respect the EMDR. But I'm also saying go gentle, go easy with yourself. That it's not about following the rules of EMDR. It's about using them and seeing how it hits the person you're working with and responding to that person in that moment.
What a lovely note to end on. David, thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time and your wisdom, and I'm sure those listening will be as grateful as I am. So, yeah, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. It's been really fun sitting here with you. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Mastering Therapy. All of the resources mentioned are available in the show notes. If you're interested in getting more information on what's been covered this season, you can sign up to our mailing list or visit the website masteringtherapy.com. If you know someone that would be great to interview on this podcast, you can submit a recommendation, and I'd love to hear from you. The Mastering Therapy podcast and the information provided by me and my guests is solely intended for qualified professionals for information and educational purposes. I look forward to you joining me next time.